In this video, we're going to look at the German short row method, which is a method for using short rows to shape your knitwear. And that looks just like it sounds. That just means that instead of knitting all the way to the end of your row, you're going to stop short of the end and knit back the other direction. In order to do that without creating holes in your knitting, you're going to use a special stitch called the double stitch, and that is what makes this the German short row method, that double stitch technique. So I will show you several instances of that here, and you'll look at what short row shaping might look like using this method. So I've knit to almost to the end of my row. I've left 4 stitches unworked, and that will be the end of my first short row I'm going to show you here on this swatch. So leaving those 4 stitches unworked, I'm going to turn my work, bring the yarn to the front of my fabric, and the front is relative to how I'm looking at my knitting, not front or back, right side, wrong side. So I've brought my yarn to the front, I've slipped my stitch purlwise onto my right hand needle, and now I'm going to lift that yarn, the working yarn, over top of the needle, and that takes that 1 stitch and pulls it up, making it look as if it were 2 stitches on the needle. So that's that double stitch we've created, and that's going to bridge the gap between those stitches that I did not work, that have 1 less row of knitting, and the stitches that I'm working in my short rows. So now I'm going to purl back the other direction, so I've got my 1 stitch that looks as if it's 2, and then all these standard purl stitches all the way across until we'll make another double stitch and turn back the other direction. And we're not increasing stitches when we make these double stitches. You'll see that in the end we're going to go back and knit each double stitch as if it's 1. So it's going to go back to looking like just 1 regular stitch, just like all the others. So here I'm going to stop 4 stitches short of the end of my row here as well. So we'll do symmetrical short rows on this little swatch here so you can see what happens when you do that. I'm bringing the yarn to the front of my work, and I'm slipping my stitch purlwise to the right hand needle and lifting the yarn up and over the needle to create that double stitch. Now I'm just going to knit back the other direction, and we'll do a couple more sets of these short rows, knitting back and forth and stopping short so that we can create that double stitch and raise the center of our fabric. So you see I'm coming up on that double stitch here on the left. There's always a little bit of a gap to the outside of that double stitch, but then you'll see this stitch that looks a little bit funny from the rest, and I'm stopping 5 short of that. So I've got 5 stitches, then my double stitch. I'm going to turn my work, bring the yarn to the front, slip my stitch purlwise, and lift the yarn over to the back of the needle, creating that double stitch. And now I'm bringing the yarn back to the front to purl. You'll notice that I did that by bringing that yarn around underneath the tip of my right hand needle. You don't want to bring the yarn back over the way that it came when you pulled it up over the needle to create your double stitch, because that would just undo the work that you've done. So be careful how you bring that yarn back to the front. Do it just as you would do in your regular knitting. So I've stopped 5 stitches before that double stitch again and turned my work, and I'm bringing the yarn to the front and slipping my stitch purlwise, lifting the working yarn up over the needle to create the double stitch, and knitting back in the other direction. Now we're going to look at what happens when we come up to those double stitches on the following row. So here's my double stitch. It pulls the fabric a little funny. You want to knit through both strands that are pulled up over your needle, and then it ends up looking just like any other stitch. So I'm knitting across some regular knit stitches here, and coming up on another double stitch, I want to tuck my needle through both strands there and knit that stitch off the needle. So that's what it looks like on the knit side. We're going to look at what it looks like when you come up to it on the purl side as well here shortly, but this creates knitted stitches that look just like any other stitch. Now turning our work, we're going to go on the purl side and see what happens when we meet those double stitches on the next row when we're purling. Okay, a couple more stitches and then we're at our first double stitch on the purl side. You can see there's a gap to the outside of it, and you've got 2 wraps of yarn that are coming over the needle there. You just want to make sure that you get underneath both of these strands that are on your needle and knit right through the center of that double stitch. Purl through it before dropping that stitch off your left hand needle. And same thing over here, so just make sure you get through both strands that are coming around the needle there and purl that stitch as if it's one regular stitch. And now that we've done that, we'll turn our work and look at our right side here. So you can see those 2 stitches, that double stitches that we purled, look just like any other as well. And you aren't going to be able to see those very well, which is a great thing about German short rows. They're pretty invisible. And now I'm going to pull through so that the cable can be flexible here for us so you can see what's beginning to happen here. So because I've put short rows in the middle of this swatch, you can see that my knitting curves upward in the middle. And that's one method to shape your knitting.